and welcome to this Connect University session on what the EU is doing to protect people, and especially children, from the potential risks of the digital technologies and online harms. As we know, digital technologies and digital society brings many new ways to communicate and entertain and explore and fulfill many ambitions and many innovations. However, we are also very much aware that they also bring many challenges, particularly when it comes to protecting people, and again, especially children in the digital realm. Social media platforms can be the home of dangerous cyberbullying and online harassment, and the addictive nature of some digital technologies like gaming or social media can contribute to mental health issues. So why are we doing this workshop today? This is in the context of the publication of the third State of the Digital Decade report, which will be indeed published in June. So we want to discuss the link between digital and health, which is part of the elements that the Digital Decade policy program monitors. And our head of unit, Eric Peters, will tell us more about this in a moment. There will likely be a new wave of rules that will double down on the protection of the youngest from harmful and addictive content. As you know, in her political guidelines, President Ursula von der Leyen last July 2024 promised, for instance, a first ever European-wide inquiry on the impact of social media on the well-being of young people. And more specifically, also with this workshop, we want to see whether our EU content moderation rules correctly address the need to protect people from online harms and potentially addictive applications. First, some housekeeping rules, points before giving the floor to our wonderful guests and colleagues here. Our speakers will first present, and then there will be a round of questions and answers that will be addressed to them after each part of their presentations. So we have a number of people connecting online. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for following the discussions today remotely. You can use Slido on our Futurium page, and through which you can, as some of you already know, suggest some of the questions that we can then address to our speakers. You can publish any comments or questions directly on our Futurium page. And just for your information, this session will be recorded. It's published on Futurium on our YouTube channel, and you will have access to the slides afterwards. So in the first part, we will have a presentation about the State of the Digital Decade report for this year, to be published again in June. And this will be our acting head of unit, Eric Peters, to present. Then in the second part, we will consider the mental health issues at stake when it comes to the growing use of digital. And we will have a great speaker from the World Health Organization to present. Then we will have a discussion by Professor Fabrizio Esposito of the Nova School of Law, who will introduce us to some of the mechanisms related to platforms and the internet that trigger issues among people. So we will discuss a little bit, we will find out more about what the attention economy is about and hyper-engaging patterns. So that should also be very interesting. Then we will move to an intervention by one of our colleagues, Andrea Tognoni, who works here at DG Connect, on what we are doing currently at the EU level and member states level to address the need to protect children from online harms. And finally, last but not least, we will have closing remarks from Mads Vigzo-Betzen, who is a media and tech attaché at the permanent representation of Denmark to the EU. As we all know, Denmark is going to take over the presidency of the EU Council in July. So we're very much looking forward to today's Connect University. Thank you very much to all for joining. And the floor is now for Eric Peters to take. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you so much, Aline, and good morning, everyone. This is my pleasure to remind ourselves the overall framework of the policy discussion that we are having today on the nexus between digitalization and mental health as part of the Digital Decade policy program. I think this is a very timely discussion. I mean, you all remember 5 years ago, the world was entering into lockdowns, which was a brutal signal of the importance of digitalization in our life. The confinement showed that it was impossible to work, to study, to interact without these fabulous tools that we have developed through connectivity, through high performance computing, AI, all these tools that we are using intensively. And by then, 5 years ago, we realized that this signal needed to be followed up by policy initiative. And this is why we have developed the digital decade at that time under the leadership of President von der Leyen. And we have invented a new type of policy initiative with a few slides that I will show to you. On the next slide, please, Eileen. Sorry. So we have developed a policy framework which is based on a series of tools that we are showing up to you. First, we have adopted concrete targets with member states, which enable member states to fix an horizon for 2030 with a set of very precise quantitative targets in the all key areas for digitalization, being skills, infrastructure, connectivity, quantum computing, AI adoption, e-government, e-health. So all the areas we can measure to which member states have dedicated some commitment. And also we have developed these targets as part of general objectives. So the objective for us is not only to build infrastructure to make sure that population has the right skills, but also to make sure that it contributes to overall political objectives such as sovereignty, competitiveness, and to build also human-centered environment. We have attached to that goals a declaration on digital rights and principles, which is also setting and translating the idea that we are not going to be successful in our digitalization except if it benefits to people. And this is particularly as part of this context, how we can make sure that digitalization is not harming, but benefiting, in particular, some vulnerable populations such as children, and also benefiting health of people. So this is as part of this overall framework, which, by the way, was quite cutting edge at that time. And you may see, for instance, in the Draghi report, a lot of inspiration from that method, where we see the value of cooperating with member states, but also to have, as part of this cooperation, a focus linked to concrete commitment and joint commitment with these member states. So if we look at the annual report that we do, which is a bit the sort of benchmark that we are publishing every year to inform the community, but also to take stock with member states on where we are against the progress for these different objectives and targets. In 2024, in July, we have had the second report, which has been taking stock on all dimensions. It's quite a big report. I mean, basically, it's a report of more than 1,000 pages, which is following the trajectory on the different targets, also measuring the progress we do in terms of security, in terms of competitiveness, resilience. And the conclusion of that report was a sort of a wake-up call on EU's positioning vis-à-vis the ICT global ecosystem, explaining that we are still missing a lot of the impulse and energy to make sure that our digital ecosystem is growing with scale and sufficiently speedily. And we also have noticed a series of progress that were needed, in particular the insufficient success regarding the disinformation component, but also in the fact that we need to better protect children online. And if we look at now the messages that we have also developed later in the next slide, which we are going to see a bit more the broader picture, because these messages on disinformation and protection of minors took place in a dedicated chapter in which we have been setting out a series of challenges and progress that more generally we have identified on people in society. For instance, the lack of digital skills, the lack of ICT specialists, but also the fact that people are in a situation where they see digitalization as a key component of their lives, but sometimes they need to be a bit more supported in this new component of their life. And basically, a Eurobarometer has shown, for instance, that 88% of the population is expecting a bit more support, and including human support for this, to make them more comfortable in this new life. We also pointed out the critical role of enforcement of our regulatory regime. I mean, Europe has been developing a gold standard in terms of innovation through regulation, notably through the DSA, the AI Act. And the report clearly mentioned the need for an implementing energy and force following this adoption. So this is also something that we have conveyed as a message. Then if we look at more particularly on the discussion of today on the interface between mental health and digitalization, the report has identified a set of issues. I mean, first, with the set of issues that you can see on the box on the left in blue, in which you can see that the intensity of adoption by children of connectivity and devices has led to a series of opportunities, but also a series of challenges, like the link with performance in school, also the impact of addictive design from some online platforms or for some applications which have a clear impact on the mental health of children. And just to mention, and we have put the green box in regard of the blue one to show that one of the landmark and one of the important dimension of the report that we are doing in the State of Digital Decade report is to make sure that it drives action. And we also have some concrete recommendations that are being flowed from the analysis and from the achievement assessed, and also the fact that it has an impact. And we can see on the right in the green the box that are composed of extract from the guidelines from President von der Leyen, who has clearly mentioned in a new project for the new college a set of very concrete steps and issues and actions that she intends to take, and the college is now taking for better protecting kids. Now, I think now we can turn to the future and where we are now. So as Eileen said, we are preparing the State of the Digital Decade report, which will be again an occasion for taking stock, but also producing policy recommendations. We are going to have, as part of this report, a chapter on people and society that will again look at more particularly the challenges that we are facing for making sure that this digitalization is a success for people and also more globally for the society. We will certainly have a strong focus on MENA online, and this is one of the objectives of today's workshop, to bring new expertise, to also bring fresh ideas on where we are. We are certainly also trying to seek to see how algorithms, which are more and more present in our life, is having an impact on people, and to check the ethical aspect of that algorithm. So we are going also to have a lot of studies and Eurobarometers that will be feeding into this report, complementary to the discussion of today. And of course, we have a strong network of analysts within the Commission, but also with the GRC. And we are also going to rely on statistical organization institutes from the member states, under the chapeau of ESTAT. Looking at the timeline now for the future, so and it will be my last slide before we move to the real the real discussion and the deep dive into the interface between mental health and digitalization. So in terms of timeline, we are now in the middle of the work for the drafting of the report. We have a set of milestones. Of course, the discussion with member states is taking quite an important place in the preparation of this report. We had a discussion with the Digital Decade Board a few days ago. We are going to have another one in June. And we also are working very closely with the different services in the Commission to gather input and share analysis, so that by the 16th of June, the College of Commissioners will be able to adopt the report, and which will be followed up very quickly with meetings with member states to see how we can act together to reinforce our footprint vis-à-vis the achievement of our objectives and targets. So all this to say that this is a very ambitious policy agenda. We are still extremely focused on the identification of the challenges that remain to be set, and I'm really convinced that the mobilization and commitment of member states will be important and critical to make sure that the analysis will be followed by actions. And of course, in this context, I welcome very much, in particular, the participation of our colleagues from Denmark. Denmark is going to have the presidency of Europe after June, and this will be a very important period and a very important leadership for Denmark to take some action on this, which is a priority for them. So thank you so much for your participation in this workshop. So now, Eline, I give you the floor back, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present the digital decade.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for setting the tone and setting the scene. It will now be up to Dr. Lydia Lazari to take over the floor, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more on her perspective on how the growing use of digital might mean that there are more mental health issues to consider. So Dr. Lydia Lazari is joining us from the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Europe, where she is Regional Advisor on Mental Health. So we're very fortunate to have you today. Thank you so much for joining. I will be driving your slides. Please bear in mind there might be just 1 or 2 seconds of time needed between each slide, but thank you very much for bearing with us. And thank you very much for joining. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Warm good morning to everybody, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me and the WHO Regional Office for Europe through me to participate in this very important roundtable. And as introduced by Mr. Peters, the issues at hand are extremely important, and personal reflection before I go on with the slides is that it is very clear that for especially the younger generations, social media and the digital spaces are the new agora. So whatever we have learned in our classical upbringing, classical culture and history, it can be said today, but slightly moved from the physical agoras where people lived, exchanged, interacted, educated, established their social connections, their social ties. This is now more and more true for the digital spaces, where especially the younger generations are doing all that. And that means that also that contributes to also a divide, intergenerational divide that we have never seen before. So as I was introduced kindly, I am the Regional Advisor for Mental Health in WHO Europe. That is a flagship priority of our European program of work. This was established as a flagship priority even before COVID hit. And with COVID and all the mental health impacts of COVID and the subsequent crisis in our region, making mental health a priority was proven to be really long-sighted, because every member state basically has asked for support into the multiplication of and emerging of the new determinants, this being one of those. If I can have the next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, young people's lives are now lived in digital spaces. And what we have learned from the most recent health behavior in school children survey is that the increase on the time spent in digital spaces is remarkable. We see that 36% of adolescents report continuous online contact with friends and others. So it's more than 1/3. And 44% of 15-year-old girls. What we see from the, if I can make a comment on the graph that you see here, is that you clearly see the girls having a bit of a higher and especially the older girls now from 11 to 13 to 15, we see an increased online presence and an increased online not only presence but also interaction if we compare girls and boys. And this is something that needs to inform us about how we approach that when we inform policies, but also operate and take actions on the basis of those policies. And what we see is that a continuous online contact is most often among close friends. 34% of adolescents report playing digital games every day, and 22% report playing for at least 4 hours on a gaming day. So this is a very, very important. More than 1/5 of our adolescents play at least 4 hours online. And this is a space that we as parents, we as mental health professionals, we as policymakers, we as community workers do not know how to penetrate and how to interact with. So that is another wake-up call. Next slide, please. So across multiple indicators, we see that there is a decline of mental health and well-being of adolescents. Life satisfaction, self-rated health, and mind you, it's not only mental health, but health in general. But social support declined since the last round 2018, while health complaints increased. Over 40% of adolescents report to feel pressure from schoolwork, with 1 in 5 adolescents reporting a lack of support from either family or friends. And 1 in 4 girls at age 15 report feeling lonely. Suicide, even though in the European Union, but also worldwide, we have seen a drop of the suicide rates across the world, very specifically due to good policy measures that have been enforced by many countries. We still have suicide as the leading cause of death among young people aged 15 to 29 years in the WHO European region. Next, please. And on the other side, so while we are describing the size of the problem, and you see that the evidence shows that the problem is increasing, is not stagnating, is increasing. And at the same time, only a few people with mental health conditions receive treatment, such as, for instance, 10%, an average of 10% of people living with anxiety disorders are receiving any treatment from mental health services. No, I'm not talking about other services. I'm talking about other systems. I'm talking about mental health services. And when it is the figure, it's average, because there is a huge abyss between for instance, 2% of people in low and middle income countries receiving treatment for anxiety disorders and 70% of those receiving treatment for anxiety disorders in high income countries. So for us in WHO, the divide in the services, mental health service availability and access is very worrying. And if we go to the next conditions, major depressive disorders, the figures speak for themselves. No, and we do not fare well in terms of treatment offered to people that are experiencing substance use disorders, where only 7% of them receive any treatment from mental health services. Again, those are average figures, and the divide between high-income countries and low and middle-income countries is huge, is abysmal. If I can go to the next slide, please. And that means that there is a huge, huge concern across the world, and especially Europe is very worried about. And you see it's either in UN countries like France or Sweden that have taken measures about addressing the concerns raised by social media use, but also worldwide we see that the UN is also being very active, and WHO among the UN agencies is also looking into that. Next, please. We need a balanced approach now when it comes to how to address, when we discuss about addressing those harms. We need a balanced approach that mitigates harms, but also optimize benefits of social media and digital mental health. And why we say that is because we have evidence that the social media impact on mental health is mixed and nuanced. We cannot adopt one position without considering how nuanced the evidence is. Because what we see is that online activity can simultaneously have both positive and negative impacts on young people. And while digital mental health tools and interventions can expand access and equity and improve reach to vulnerable youth. I'll talk about that in a moment, but it's just to keep in mind that the digital spaces, while they can make things more difficult, especially for certain groups among our young adolescents and young people, there is also a lot of opportunity that should not go wasted when we want to address those negative impacts. Next slide, please. So what are the positive impacts of digital technology use on young people's mental health? We have seen that evidence tells us that moderate use and positive interactions may enhance empathy and self-esteem. We have had, for instance, and the next is also through social media, offers opportunities for connection and belonging, particularly for vulnerable groups. And in one of our events, I'm now allowing myself to quote one of our young partners. It's a young person living with multiple disabilities, including autism. And in one of our meetings in WHO Europe, trying to engage with young people for moving ahead the mental health agenda for Europe, she stood up and she said, "You grown-ups describe the digital spaces as negative only. But for people like me," she said, "these spaces offer an opportunity to connect with my peers, which for the reasons of my disabilities, I would not find otherwise." And therefore, we need to be mindful of the opportunity for connection and the building of a sense of belonging that social media offers, particularly for vulnerable groups. And again, here in the positive impacts, we could also, through peer emulation, see improved problem-solving skills. Next slide, please. But again, there are also negative impacts of digital technology use on young people's mental health. These are on the scope of this discussion, and these are certainly under the microscope of many governments and member states nowadays. We have seen depression, anxiety, suicide-related behaviors linked to passive use, online victimization, and appearance-focused content. Passive use and appearance-related content reduce well-being. Social media carries risks such as loneliness and hate speech, and also it can carry risks for disordered eating, poor sleep, increased aggression. So these are the items that come from the evidence review that we have conducted very recently. Next, please. But what we see, because some of you might argue with me, but you presented the positive aspects and now you are presenting the negative aspects. How can we connect those two? And what we can see is that some young people appear more vulnerable than others. Because certainly the stage of biological and cognitive development of a child and adolescent has a great deal of impact on how what is the impact on the extent and nature of the impact of digital spaces and social media use on them. And we see that heavier social media use pre-existing mental health problems, children with offline vulnerabilities, such as children being raised in lower socioeconomic backgrounds, children that belong to, for instance, migrant backgrounds or ethnic minorities or disabilities are more vulnerable, and also gender minority youth. No, these are the vulnerabilities that are more exposed to the use of social media and digital spaces. Next, please. So the positive aspects of digital mental health interventions. First of all, accessibility and affordability. For instance, we have seen here in Denmark, there is University of Odense has this program on digital telepsychiatry that offers evidence-based digital interventions for people all over Denmark, which means that even people who are not living in the catchment area of that mental health service are able to access an affordable evidence-based intervention. So this is one of the positive aspects of the use of digital spaces. Those mental health interventions are offered at the convenience of the user and are offered flexibly, because users can engage at their own pace, anytime and anywhere, without the need for scheduling appointments. The anonymity that is offered through online mental health interventions can contribute to reducing stigma. As we have seen, one of the reasons adolescents, for instance, are hesitant to access physical mental health services is because they don't want to be seen as someone that is living with a mental health condition. By the mere fact that they are visiting a mental health or even a health service implies that they are carrying a mental health condition. So the anonymity of the mental health intervention offered digitally is certainly a positive aspect. The scalability means that the digital mental health interventions can reach large audiences, and including underserved populations that have barriers to access those services, either geographical barriers or cultural barriers or language barriers, and so on and so forth. There is a variety of tools and approaches that can be offered digitally, and then the integration of other health services is certainly possible online, because there are wearable devices, electronic health records, or online medical consultations for holistic care, which means that a digital mental health intervention can be very well integrated into the bouquet of other interventions that can be offered online, either by healthcare services or social care services. So a more holistic approach to that. Next, please. But what are the areas requiring extra care? You, of course, have seen the proliferation of the self-help apps offered online, the self-professed gurus that make themselves available online for helping others. Many of them are not scientifically proven. They have no scientific validation, and the effectiveness has not been proven. Not only effectiveness, but also safety has not been proven. So that there is a risk of replacing core services that are well regulated, that are evidence-based, with lower quality digital alternatives. And this is the first thing that we need to keep in mind whenever kind of regulating the digital alternatives. There is a lack of legal and ethical clarity certainly regarding privacy and data security risks. Sensitive mental health data may be vulnerable to breaches, to misuse, or unethical sharing practices. And this is something, of course, the EU is very mindful of that. And we just heard about the regulatory steps taken forward for addressing this lack, but still the risks are always there. There is a reduced human interaction, and Mr. Peters made it clear that the 88% of the EU populations wants a human support in the in the transformation towards digital services. And in that sense, AI and self-guided programs may not fully replace the empathy, the deep understanding, and adaptability of human therapists. There is a risk for self-diagnosis, misdiagnosis on an inadequate treatment. A friend of mine who is a doctor practicing in an EU country, in his social media avatar, he puts a quote that says, "I'm in competition with Dr. Google," because he frequently faces the inadequate diagnosis or treatment that is offered through uncontrolled online resources. Accessibility and digital literacy. There is a potentially exclusion of older adults. I mentioned that the intergenerational divide, of course, lower income individuals or those in remote areas. And certainly the digital literacy and the digital coverage is uneven in some countries. And one thing that cannot be stated sufficiently is commercial and ethical concerns. The prioritization of profit over patient well-being, using intrusive ads or selling user data. In WHO, we have seen this happen very early with the use of, for instance, other products of food, alcohol, and etc., and other devices in an uncontrolled way. And that means that profit is prioritized over patient well-being. And it has already come in the mental health area, where all, for instance, the apps that are propagating self-help are used for profit rather than patient well-being. Next slide, please. But there are some very good examples. I mentioned Denmark. What I refer to Denmark is a public service offered by the mental health services of the capital region of Denmark. But the Mind Helper is another example of an online tool that is offered to everybody that has an interest and access to internet. The same is it's another is another initiative that comes from the Netherlands. So those are two examples of how a good practice of mental health interventions can be offered online in a safe and evidence-based way. Next, please. What we're doing in WHO Europe is that part of the Regional Digital Health Action Plan for 2023 to 2030, we are developing a roadmap for the digitalization of mental health systems. Together with the Department of Health in Ireland, we are moving ahead in developing that roadmap that has 5 guiding principles. One is certainly placing the individual at the center of care. The second is to understand health system challenges, including health needs and trends. We cannot do anything digital without understanding what are the challenges that health systems face in the first place. Then the policy needs to be based on evidence and lessons learned. We need to learn from previous challenges and current challenges and emerging determinants. We need to use digital transformation to reimagine the future of health systems. And last but not least, committing to the long term and using an integrated care approach. So we cannot take the digitalization as one isolated section of reimagining and designing the future health systems. Next, please. I would like to also mention here that we are also working with the Polish Ministry of Health, heading towards the meeting organized by the Polish EU presidency on addressing digital determinants for the social media impacts on mental health of young people. We have just conducted an evidence review and a policy making, and are in touch with the Polish Ministry of Health to finalize the recommendations that we have built together on an expert group in the last couple of months, so that we can contribute to also the work that the European Union is doing, and very happy to continue engaging with you in the future for mainstreaming those policy recommendations again together with Council conclusions for our joint objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lazzari, for this very comprehensive presentation, very rich, really suggesting that there's not just one dimension, but multiple dimensions required, and efforts from all definitely needed. I have one small question, if I may, before turning to the questions from our participants online, and there are several of those. You mentioned in the areas of extra care, the scientific validation and the risk of replacing core services by alternatives that are of lower quality. And I was wondering if you have an example that you could, or you could elaborate to explain a bit more what you meant.
What I mean is that the core services are regulated, and the regulation of core services is not only on the basis of safety and confidentiality and quality, but also in terms of the evidence-based reviews. So let me say, I mentioned, for instance, the telepsychiatry here at the capital region of Denmark, no? And that the main tool, the main intervention that they offer is the very well researched and evidence-based, computer-based, or online-based. Oh God, it doesn't come to my mind now. Behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm sorry, my mind froze. Cognitive behavioral therapy. This has been not only very well researched, but also its online use has been very well researched. So in enforcing that particular intervention, there are guarantees for the citizen that they are receiving something that is safe, that is confidential, but that is also proven to work. The alternative, so this is one very well researched intervention that is offered digitally. What we see, unfortunately, is that because the proliferation of digital spaces is so fast, and it's so much faster than policy regulations, than evidence building, we see that often there are apps that are offered to the population through, for instance, social media. And those apps may have all the very good intentions of very well-intended professionals, but that haven't been evidence-based. And the offering of those, also another point here is not only the fact that there is not sufficient evidence to confirm the validity and the effectiveness of that intervention, but there is also not sufficient regulation enforced to make sure that people are protected. So I wouldn't want to go to a particular, for legal reasons, I don't want to go to particular cases, but anything that is offered to the citizens without a track record of the body of evidence that proves its effectiveness, and the measures, the proven measures taken to protect the citizens in terms of confidentiality, privacy, data, is a very low quality offer. And this is what should concern us. So this is the risk of replacing solid interventions with unproven interventions is always there. And unfortunately, there is not always the possibility. Citizens are somehow unprotected of that, because as I mentioned at the beginning, especially because our young people are spending, and adolescents especially, are spending so much time online. This is a space that we, either as parents or as mental health professionals or as regulators, we do not know how to penetrate. We do not know what a young person we have at home is doing in the 4 hours they spend in their rooms. They are certainly spending time online, and we have no idea what is this time spent for. And that's why it's the risk of, even if with the best intention, our adolescent, our teenager is looking for help online, there is no guarantee that the help that he or she manages to find online is of quality, is safe, and is proven. I hope this answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. In 4 hours, by the way, that seems quite a lot, but no, thank you. That's very helpful. We have one question from Anike, and it's very interesting. So there are mixed signals coming from schools that have removed the phones of children in order to improve mental health, addiction, and attention span. And this participant is asking whether you have any insights or perceptions about it. And another one, a little bit in that kind of same line of thoughts, is that there seems to be no conclusive study on the relationship between video games and mental health, because there are some studies, but some diverging results. So it's hard to find really one that is clear on the effects. So there's still a perception about this impact of video games on mental health. And in case you wanted to comment on that, that would be very welcome as well. Thank you.
I'd start from the second point. Thank you. Yes, there is no conclusive evidence. There is some research going on that is trying to explore if there is any potential of video games to any benefit of video games on the mental health of certain strata of adolescents and young people. The evidence is inconclusive, so I can only confirm that the evidence is conclusive rather than endorse one or another position. And the first question, if I can have a reminder on...
Yes, it was, the attempts of some countries to ban phones at school for children, whether that's, you have any insights or perceptions about it.
Again, there is, yes, we are aware that there are countries that have taken this measure. There are countries that even are going far further ahead of banning certain social media platforms. As WHO, we do not still have a position on that, rather than saying that any measure that helps the attention span of children and young adolescents, dedicating to the issue at hand, that helps, for instance, they're focusing on the academic achievements, is welcome. This, how this is done, it's a matter of the countries to enforce it. And this can be done through one thing, for instance, that our evidence review, I mentioned the evidence review that we have just conducted together with the Digital Transformation Health Lab and that we are going to present very soon in the event hosted by the Polish presidency. What we're trying to say is that together the expansion of digital spaces comes at a time when we have a shrinking of the offline spaces and offline activities. So, and I'm sorry if I may seem now as I'm diverting the question and the answer, but we need to be mindful that all the time that our teenagers spend online is a time that could and should have been spent offline through increased interaction. But then the question is, how are we as societies, as regulators, as professionals, how are we securing those spaces for our young people? Are we giving them sufficient opportunities to have competitive interests offline? So if we are talking about benefits, but also harms of online spaces, are we able to compete for to reverse the harmful use of online spaces and times with offline activities. So this is something that is very strongly, we would like as WHO to propose very strongly as a policy recommendation for our member states. So in a way, this is probably not a direct answer to the question, rather than to say, if the school is banning the phones in their environments, in their spaces, the school should also be able to, meanwhile, make their spaces very interesting and competing, because we also need to see the other way of the coin. So what has happened that suddenly the offline spaces are no longer interesting?
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think we can also emphasize the role of parents next to schools, of course. So
Absolutely.
thank you for that. There's a few questions, so I will try to be selective, but we have one that sort of refers back to your point on the accessibility challenge, but also the Dr. Google. So it comes from a participant that is asking you to comment on, because it is so hard to reach proper services, what do you think of people using AI services that mimic discussions with a health professional, especially in low-income countries? So maybe a brief reaction from you on that?
That is, thank you for asking that question. This is happening. People see it. I have seen a lot of discussions that see AI as the panacea of the lack or poor access to care. We and WHO, we would like, and this is also, your question is probably linked also to the fact that there are long waiting times across all member states. Some member states have longer waiting times than some others, but certainly the waiting times for services are a problem. And I'm sorry, I do not have a better answer than that, but we, for instance, we are trying to, in frame of the collaboration that we are having with the Commission, at DG Sante and WHO Europe are collaborating to implement a project called Addressing Mental Health Challenges in the EU countries, Iceland and Norway. And as part of that, we are trying to institute a series, or to develop a series of webinars, and trying to start with a big elephant in the room, that is the waiting times, because I suspect your question about the AI stems from the fact that some citizens in some parts of the region are tired of waiting for a placement in a physical service, and then therefore are going to AI. It's not proven unless there is evidence that that intervention has gone some reviewing, some scientific validation. I would refrain from endorsing any kind of intervention that has not been validated scientifically. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much for this perspective. Maybe to wrap up, a couple of questions that you can address. So participants, thank you for your presentation. What would you consider to be the most effective or needed policy interventions to advance and scale up the use of digital tools to support mental health? And maybe similar, but not quite the same, what winning message could policymakers and industry convey through their actions and discourses to ensure not to turn off people from using digital while being aware of the risks for health? So what kind of balance could you have, could we strike when it comes to the mix of arguments? So tough, general, broad questions, but feel free to do your best.
I do not have one single policy priority, because there are few, but I'll share with you the policy recommendations that we are bringing together when in that event hosted by the Polish presidency. First of all, it has to become a policy priority. Digital well-being has to become a policy priority. It can no longer be thought as be discussed as an afterthought. Oh, by the way, let's talk about services, health systems, and by the way, let's also talk about digital. So it's not by the way, it cannot be an afterthought. It has to be a policy priority. The second is what I could not state enough: apply proven intersectoral public health strategy to improve digital well-being. So it has not only to be proven, but also intersectoral. And this is another thing where I'm sorry to take one more minute to say that as a mental health professional and as a public health worker, I see, unfortunately, very often a perception that the lack of well-being is and the poor mental health and well-being of our population is the responsibility of mental health experts and of the public health sector, which unfortunately is not true. This perception is very counterproductive because it isolates not only it isolates the mental health sector within health, but it also deprives public health from benefiting from other policy measures. So it has to be an intersectoral approach. I mentioned education, but there are so many. Innovation has to be on board, labor has to be on board, welfare has to be on board. So it cannot be a health sector responsibility alone. Another policy recommendation is to develop clear guidance on digital well-being and healthy technology use. No, I mentioned the 4 hours of gaming used by at least one-fifth of our adolescents. No, another thing that is very dear to my heart that is not spoken enough is the accountability of industry and commercial interest. We need to hold industry and commercial interest to account, similarly like we have done as public health workers, as public health community have done with, for instance, tobacco, food, alcohol industry. We need to hold also the commercial interests of digital technologies into account. We need to support and initiate laws and regulations to make digital environments healthy places for young people. And it was mentioned by Mr. Peters at the beginning and all the EU actions to that. Certainly build the capacity of the health workforce to promote healthy technology use, especially what we have talked about young people, but we talked also about the intergenerational divide. So we cannot have older people embracing use of technology if they are not sufficiently literate on, but also if our health workers are not sufficiently empowered to support the use of technology. Invest, as I mentioned also in my previous answer, invest in alternatives to screen-based parenting, play and entertainment for families and communities. So what I mentioned is but the offline in-person activities and initiatives, and make user-friendly communities, of course, digitally friendly, but also in-person friendly. And last but not least is to increase research into the impacts of social media. And I was very happy to hear Mr. Peters referring to the initiative by President von der Leyen into increasing research and evidence about that. With this, I hope I also answered.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Lazari. And this is a contribution we very much value from the World Health Organization. So thanks a lot for telling us a little bit more about the scope of this issue. So now, because you've mentioned the time spent, for instance, on gaming, 4 hours a day, we will hear from Dr. Fabrizio Esposito, Fabrizio Esposito, Associated Professor at Nova School of Law. So maybe we will understand, thanks to you, you know, how come people get to spend 4 hours a day on something online. So we will hear from you a little bit more about the mechanisms that trigger mental health issues among people. So over to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to share some thoughts on these very important issues. The first thing that I would like to say is that I also used to spend at some times of my life around 4 hours a day on a video game, but I think it was a very good one. So one important issue when we talk about these topics is that we need to embrace complexity and look into granularity, because there are video games and video games. There are content there are cartoons for children and cartoons for children, and we need to collectively develop quickly the wisdom to identify the distinction. Next slide. So the thing that I am going to focus on is the dynamics that are related to these apparently innocent question that sometimes we ask explicitly or implicitly in our interactions, because especially in the digital environment, there is a complex interaction of legal, economic, and cognitive mechanisms that guide the ways in which our attention is being allocated to different things. And as Dr. Lazeri has emphasized, it is non-obvious that in many circumstances our attention is being allocated where it should be. Next slide. So my interest as an academic, but also as a citizen, into this issue came during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, I personally used to say that I finished Netflix twice, once in English and the other time in Portuguese. The latter at least helped me with the language. But as a sort of de facto ethnographic study, I could see very closely the routine of people I care about, and I saw how strong the pool of content media platforms and some online video games that have similar features to content sharing platforms had on the routine of these people, in context where they could not, there were not many options available, right? And there was also a lot of anxiety floating around. Next. And all of these led to also, I think, a very, one of my favorite experiences so far of working with a master student, because eventually my concerns and the interest of the students led to this publication that is the article that condenses my best understanding of the issues that we are talking about today. Next. So we talk a lot about the attention economy, and I realized that there is sometimes a misconception that this excellent book was from 2016 is clearly is clearly challenging, and that's the idea that the attention economy is something that has to do with those instruments or services that you saw in the previous slides and their cousins. But this is actually, the attention economy is the entertainment industry, right? Is the news industry, is all those situations where people in the 20th century, 19th century, 16th century, 4th century, and so on, made a living by being remunerated for occupying the attention of other people. Now, the question is, what is going on today that is so distinctive, right? That makes it so that the word attention economy has, for many people, a new cognition, with a new meaning, which is restricted, right? So focusing only on the digital. Next slide. And this very detailed graph, which is taken from path-breaking book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, as you can see below, essentially points out that the reason why we have very serious and very well-funded concerns in the digital environment is the capacity of our counterparties, right, of the business users and service providers to monitor, surveil, in the language that Zuboff has contributed to popularize, our behavior, and by doing this, to essentially understand what is going to maximize the chances that we behave in the way that the business provider wants. So what we're going to buy, how long we're going to stay online, and in the most dismal context, also for whom we are going to vote. Next slide. And there is no short supply of different perspectives on these matters. So the book that I mentioned before, perhaps my favorite book, Stand Out of Our Light, on these issues. But then there are also more politically focused books like the third one that I'm mentioning. And the European regulator has been looking in different ways, different levels. Click. Click, please, because there is something that should exactly. And a very significant one is the declaration, the resolution by the European Parliament in 2023, discussing comprehensively these issues. And one of the challenges that we have as law community, right? So Dr. Lazzeri rightfully called us out, is that we need to understand the dynamics very well, because if we exercise pressure in the wrong place, or we exercise partial pressure, we are not going to get where we want to go. Next. So, for example, in the attention economy, real-time bidding is a very important infrastructure, and there has been research stressing that real-time bidding is most probably facing unsurmountable challenges under the GDPR. The implication of which being that the system should dramatically change. And one of the concerns that these kind of implications of the regulatory framework imply is, fine, so we're going to protect personal data, but what is going to happen to what I personally think is one of the things that we should be protecting the most in this area, namely our attention. Next slide. Because the minute we are talking about very flexible and innovative environments, and every time something is changed, we can expect the ecosystem to adapt quickly. So when, for example, Google had announced that they would eliminate third-party cookies, for a complex set of reasons that supposedly included also a concern for the negative consequences of excessive surveillance. The industry was very quick in pointing out different ways in which surveillance could be developed and ensured without controlling, without using cookies. And the kind of concern that I personally have in this context has to do with the business model. So if the business model maximizes revenues most of the times through impressions, right? Selling impressions to the highest bidder through real-time bidding. And they also, and the other component that they maximize is the time that you spend online so that they can show you impressions. If we effectively reduce the capacity of real-time bidding to maximize revenue per impression, the real concern is that people may well end up spending more time online, because through adaptations of the service, the degree of aggression on the capacity of the mechanisms to keep us online is going to increase. And here comes the next slide, a group a social group that we should be paying a lot of attention, and that is neuro marketeers. Because neuromarketing is, of course, an area, an activity that can have important social, that can create a lot of social value, but it can also easily miss the important distinction between creating value for the final consumer, right? The person that supposedly should be benefiting from entering into a transaction, and maximizing revenues for the trader. And ideally, the two things overlap, but in reality, we know that they often don't. Next slide. And we know by now that they often don't, because our brains are very complex, host very complex processes, and these processes operate at different levels. What, for example, in this context are called different brains, but normally we can also think of them just as systems or processes. And depending on which process is most involved in a decision, we may get closer to the ideal of the fully rational and informed decision that EU consumer law celebrates, or more further ahead, closer to the reptilian brain. And I'm not here to say that all that neuromarketing does is bad, of course, but next slide. It is not very difficult to see the distinction, all right? So the book on the left is an academic book, evidence-based, that describes techniques. The second and the third book have a way more dismal dimension. Look at the subtitle of the first: Secrets for Selling to the Subconscious Mind. Do we want to live in a society where companies are successful because they sell to our subconscious mind? The law says that we want companies to sell to our fully informed and rational persona. So probably we have a serious, there is a serious concern here. And the second one, the choice factory, and the author had, I would say, dared, in Portuguese there is a beautiful word, the ousadia, to put a barcode on the silhouette of a person, right? Making it very explicit that the point of the book is to turn the client into the product, not the client into the sovereign individual to whom the product is served. Next. But again, it's not difficult to find in this area actually useful perspectives that help us identifying what the positive role that neuromarketing can perform in the consumer journey. And Roger Dooley has been talking about these in different through different outlets, and as you can see, he has this idea that neuromarketeers have confirmed that is a rule of thumb, where you grab the attention of the consumer or at the beginning a little bit, and then that's where you create the cognitive space for the consumer to properly deliberate, and you eliminate the frictions. If we were to enter more into the detail, of course, the nuance is fundamental, because what is the subconscious, the non-conscious motivation that you provide can be extremely problematic. But it is possible to single out a mechanism And this is the core mechanism that we should be concerned with in this area, I think. Next slide. And that is dopamine, right? So these two wonderful books say it all, right? Dopamine, the molecule of more. So this is a hormone that importantly contributes to our development of concerning the concerning behavior consisting in spending ridiculous amount of times watching trivial content or engaging in playing with trivial and very repetitive video games. Right? We could also talk about psychological frameworks that could be used to assess whether a video game is worth or being playing or not, because those exist. But what I think is important to stress in this context is that one perhaps I think the most discomforting thing that I learned is not about the fact that there is people that try to make a lot of money by manipulating other people. I think selfishness is a character that is spread among humans to varying degrees, so this is not surprising. But what I find particularly discomforting is the information that, because of the way in which dopamine works, makes it so that the expectation of the satisfaction of your want is normally going to be more satisfactory than the outcome itself. And this creates and this is important to emphasize, because when we study philosophy of action, philosophy of mind, and so on, the rational description that we normally start with is the idea that you have a desire, you have beliefs about how you can satisfy that desire, then you perform a plan of action, and then if you are successful, you are happy. It turns out that because of dopamine, we are the happiest when we think that we're going to succeed. And then we're not so happy when we actually succeed. And the second, perhaps even more discomforting element is that over time, we need to be exposed to the same stimulus for more in order to achieve the same level of satisfaction. And this has also a negative effect on how we perceive our other interactions. So if we end up spending a lot of time online, the offline worlds becomes less attractive to us, with a very significant negative implications to all our personas, as our as spouses, as partners, as friends, as family members, as workers, as students, as voters, right? In all these things, we become less motivated. So we can blame human nature, but next, we can also blame certain specific choices that have been popularized and that have been injected into the business models we are talking about. And here I like to single out this book, because just like the other two that I singled out, the title and the subtitle essentially say it all, right? How to build habit-forming products. Now, I like that this bottle here helps to be habit-forming, because it supposedly helps me to keep hydrated as much as I should. That's good. But it is not always good that a product is habit forming, right? So if we apply the insights of this book to cigarettes, are we going to be, if somebody applies those insights to cigarettes, are we going to be satisfied as a society? I don't think so. And next slide. In the digital context, one of the things that I like to, it happens in English contingently, not in other languages. What these two images have in common? Click. They both are feed. The difference is that on one side, animals are being fed feed. On the other side, humans are being fed feed. Click. And by feeding us, we are seriously exposed to risks of manipulation. Next, that the model that, for example, is described in this book very clearly encapsulate. And so the idea is that essentially people begin to do an activity for some reasons, and then the task of the product designer is to make sure that they will want to use it more and more. And if you see the smaller text, the internal trigger, emphasis click should go on really want, right? Because here is where the devil lies, in the sense that if what do we mean by really want, right? Do we really want to spend time watching cat videos? I'm not so sure. So how the idea of wanting, right, of preference, of desire is operationalized is really, really important in this context. But here the idea is that the variable reward plays a very important role because it interacts with the dopamine cycle very strongly, because the element of uncertainty makes the dopaminergic response more significant. And then there is this element of investment, so that we feel commitment to the product, and we keep using it to see what the variable resources are. Next. And here, what I wanted to, this is a graph where we put together the dimensions of the dopaminergic cycle and of the hook model to see how intimately connected they are. But in the next slide, we see better how these issues are relevant for the digital environment. Next. So here we have the trigger, and the first trigger is that grabs our attention when we are distracted is the notification. This is the explicit one. But click, the pitch right behind social media when they come in was the idea that was also rightfully celebrated today, their capacity under proper circumstances to bring us closer to each other and establish or maintain meaningful relationship in contexts where material constraints would not allow for that. But click, there is also the well-known negative dimension of our cognition, and therefore this idea of envy, social comparisons, and so on. What are the actions that are very distinctive especially on content sharing platforms? Click. Mechanisms like infinite scrolling, autoplay, they remove those stopping opportunities represented by the need to click to the next page, to click on the next episode. and these significantly contribute to the functioning of these mechanisms. The variable rewards are represented by the content itself. We're never entirely sure how interesting the next content is going to be, click. But also click by the degree of engagement that the content that we create ourselves is going to have. Click. And here the most significant investment that we have is, for the clearest example is selfies. And instead of putting my selfie or somebody else's selfie, I found quite discomforting that the Portuguese Consumer Association DECO on their website gives you suggestions on how to do good selfies, because if this analysis is correct, this is contributing to the problem rather than to the solution. Next. So in conclusion, I think that the triggers that we are dealing with are have to do with the dark side of neuromarketing and the dark side of surveillance capitalism that combined together have created this formidable tool for keeping us hooked to the screen. And I think this is a perfect conclusion to then give the floor eventually to Dr. Tognoni, who is going to discuss the regulatory framework that we have in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for yet another strong and also entertaining presentation, excellent content. And you made us want to read books again and spend less time online, I suppose. And thanks for emphasizing the very interesting topic of business models' roles in this field and the impact on the attention of people, the time spent online, and therefore potentially mental health issues. I have maybe one remark, and maybe you want to comment on it. Some parts of your presentations are not necessarily. I mean, it gives us maybe the sensation that there isn't much we can do because we're up against very powerful mechanisms. You mentioned the reptilian brains. So we know that our brain and human nature, indeed, we're geared to be attracted by stuff like sugar, irrationality, immediate pleasure, and all of that driven by dopamine, of course. So with this in mind, someone asked actually, could hyper-engaging patterns be not dark, but created to nudge positive and healthy habits or behaviors online and thereby competing with dark patterns? Is that even possible given what I've just mentioned?
So that is an excellent question, and I think we should definitely try. At the same time, I think that if it is clear that a mechanism is being misused, right, or is systematically not being used, having the best interest of the final consumer in mind, we should find ways to block it that are easily applicable and enforceable with both public and private enforcement mechanisms.
Thank you for that. Always good to also have a brief response, especially we have maybe 3-4 minutes left. I would also like to address to you 2 other questions that were sent by participants, and thank you to those following online and contributing through Slido. What are some good countermeasures against the addictive apps that we could propagate to people? For instance, notification management, app choice, modifying the feed. So that is one question. And then regarding the books that you've recommended or mentioned in your presentation, do you think the findings in those books are regional or are they valid globally? Thank you.
Okay, so very quickly on both, I think that any tool that we should explore any possible tools. The concern that I have is that often tools are being developed in echo chambers, ironically, perhaps, so that knowledge on possible treatments, therefore possible regulatory solutions are not being tested, because the people that thought about those are not the same people that are going to test them. So personally, the proposals that were suggested should be taken into consideration. But the one that if I were to be able to give one proposal, that would be exploring pagination and instead of infinite scrolls, in order to bring back those stopping cues that are currently missing. And regarding the questions on the findings, I'm not a social scientist, but if it is true that that the kind of concerns that we have in this area have to do with mechanisms that are deeply ingrained in the human brain, the level of the level of external validity and generalization of the results should be a very high one.
Thank you so much again, Professor, for your very, very interesting and very cool presentation, and making us want to read books again. That's something I will say twice also for myself. Now it is time to turn to the presentation of my colleague Andrea Tognoni, who's the case handler officer for the Digital Services Act at DG Connect. Because we've been discussing about the issues at stake, but now let's try to see what we have been doing here at EU level within the member states, and where are the gaps that remain, what can still be done. So over to you, Andrea, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and thank you to the previous speakers for the very interesting presentation. As we've heard, the interaction of the digital world with health and well-being, and in particularly mental health and children's, is a focus for many countries and stakeholders, and of course a priority for this mandate of the Commission, as we know. Today I will give just an overview of some key policy initiatives that have relevance to these issues, and in terms of both ongoing work and potentially upcoming measures, hoping, of course, to do justice to all the work that is being done by all the teams in the building and beyond. So here's just an overview of what I would briefly cover, namely the Better Internet for Kids strategy, or BAK+, Digital Services Act and its implementation and enforcement, DSA, the Article 28 of the DSA guidelines on the protection of minors, the upcoming EU white label app on age verification, the action plan against cyberbullying, and the EU-wide inquiry into the impact of social media on health. There is also a focus on health and children beyond those, of course, in other regulations such as the GDPR or the AI Act, but I will not be touching upon this today, which does not, of course, mean that they may be any equally relevant. So maybe starting from the Better Internet for Kids strategy, this strategy is from 2022. It reflects the EU vision of a human-centered digital transformation by 2030, and is aligned or in the framework of the European Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles. It is based on three pillars. First, safety or protect, the one that aims at providing safe digital experiences to protect children from harmful and illegal content, as well as other online risks, such as content and conduct, contact, and commercial or consumers risks. And in general, or more in general, to improve their well-being online through a safer, age-appropriate digital environment designed in a way that really takes into account their rights. Second pillar is empowerment. So making sure that children acquire the skills and competencies needed to make sound choices online and express themselves in the online environment safely and responsibly. And then the third pillar, respect, is about active participation. So respecting children by giving them the right to have a voice or a say in the digital environment and how it is developed and designed. So promoting more child-led activities to foster hopefully innovative and creative digital experiences. Under the BAK+, the Commission supports the BAK portal. which is a hub of resources on child online safety, available in all EU languages and some others, I believe Ukrainian as well. And in member states, it supports the European network of safer internet centers, which is a network of awareness raising centers, helplines, and hotlines that the public can use to flag anonymously, of course, suspected child sexual abuse material. So with over 20 years of experience and I think an annual outreach of 35 million citizens, including a lot of direct contact with children and young people, children of all ages, the Safer Internet Centers offer this expertise on the ground in all member states, and of course, and now lately support the enforcement of the DSA, bringing it also closer to the two children. On the next slide, you can see some of the many other activities that the Commission promotes or organizes under the BAK plus umbrella, from Safer Internet Day and the annual Safer Internet Forum, which aim at involve youth and stakeholder in youth and children and other stakeholders in new action on this topic, to the DSA available in a child-friendly format and in all EU languages, to other initiatives on balanced use of technologies, use of parental controls, and others, which unfortunately we don't have time to cover all, but all this to say there is a lot of work, great work at the BAK plus strategy. And on the next slide, so the key regulation in this issue on this domain is the DSA, which indeed promotes a safer online environment for all, based on the respect of fundamental rights, with a specific focus on the protection of minors and mental health. The DSA is a new wide, horizontal and harmonized regulatory solutions to protect citizens online, including specifically focusing on the protection of public health, protection of minors, and physical and mental well-being of users. It provides some key obligations onto all online platforms, and for those above 45 million users, it foresees additional obligations in view of their size. There are currently 25 very large online platforms and search engines that have been designated in this category, and so that are subject to this additional obligation. The DSA applies in its entirety since February 2024, so a little more than a year. And in terms of what it says more specifically, maybe next slide. It imposes for all platforms a general obligation to ensure a high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors. It bans targeted ads based on children's personal data. It requires the terms and conditions of the platforms to be easily understandable, also for children. It requires for the platforms to put in place simple mechanisms to flag illegal content on their platform. It bans dark patterns. I think we've heard a lot on those from Professor Esposito, and demands platforms specific cooperation with so-called trusted flaggers on legal content, which they can cooperate with platforms and national authorities to make sure that the flagging and the removal of illegal content is prompt. And then, of course, there is also the obligation to set up a point of contact for users to communicate directly with the platform in their member state, as well as options to intervene, or transparency obligation with regard to recommender systems setting. For in the next slide, platforms with and search engines designed as very large. Additionally, there exists the obligation to identify, analyze, and assess so-called systemic risks, so risks that are posed to people and society in a way. For example, as regards the spread of illegal content across the Union, or any negative impact on children's rights, as well as adverse effects on the physical and mental well-being of persons. There are other risks, such as also how they how they their service might stimulate behavioral addictions, among other things. So with regard to these risks, they also have the obligation to take effective measures to mitigate them, which can include changes in their recommender systems, putting up effective parental control tools or age verification solutions, or some other measures for minors, for example, to flag abuse or obtain support with regard to specific conducts. And then, of course, they have to report all this to the European Commission, as well as undergo annual independent audits to verify that they are diligently carrying out these obligations. And in case of non-compliance, the platforms can be fined with up to 6% of their yearly global earnings. So when it comes to enforcement, well, in a nutshell, these are next slide. Sorry, yeah. These are just some highlights of the DSA, which is much broader. But on this specifically, we believe that DSA has already delivered some very concrete developments and changes in terms of enforcement action. The European Commission has opened investigation against TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, among others, focusing on addictive design, harmful content, and age verification tools, and how they impact also minors. 150 days after the start of the investigation, TikTok committed to permanently withdraw the reward program called TikTok Lite in all of the EU, which we see as a very concrete in terms of enforcement. Further requests for information have been sent to porn platforms, Pornhub, Xvideos, and StripChat related to the protection of minors. I think all this shows that the protection of minors and mental health is indeed and will remain a priority for the European Commission. The Commission indeed continues to monitor the situation across all platforms, and we are in close contact with all the companies on these topics. Then, in terms of the upcoming or ongoing work on upcoming instruments, next slide, please. I would start from indeed the guidelines on Article 28.1 of the DSA, which indeed imposes this obligation to ensure a high level, to take appropriate and proportionate measures to ensure a high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors. So the guidelines will essentially aim at assisting providers of platforms to better understand and ensure this high level of privacy, safety, and security for the children on their platforms. This means that all digital services will need to apply measures to keep minors safe from the dangers and risks that can be addiction, harassment, bullying, false information, as well as illegal, harmful, and inappropriate content. But the guidelines, of course, aim at also ensuring a harmonized application across the EU of the obligation of platforms that will be enforced by national authorities. So to also maintain a coherent and non-fragmented approach to this obligation. The guidelines will put the best interest of the child at the core of designing digital services and products, and in line with the DSA architecture, I would say will take a risk-based approach. They will include a non-exhaustive list of good practices and recommendations that platform can adopt to comply with Article 28, and in principle building on a child impact assessment to guide providers to understand and identify what measures to adopt. The guidelines in terms of timeline are in the final stages of their development. There was a call for evidence to gather feedback, which closed at the end of September last year, where we received roughly 200 contribution that we have analyzed and considered and have contributed to the text and the work. And we expect the text to be ready for another consultation phase quite soon, let's say, and in time to be adopted to be confirmed, but before the summer break. Guidelines, just to flag that, are not legally binding, but of course, if platforms implement approaches that are different from those suggested in the guidelines, it will also be their responsibility to demonstrate how they ensure an equally high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors. Next slide, maybe. So we additionally, still under the DSA, but not only, to ensure that children can be protected, also by being off those services that are just not meant for them. The Commission is developing a privacy-preserving, proportionate, and risk-based European approach to age verification, which is a very wide debated issue, I would say, which will be interoperable across the EU and will look at identifying users above and or below 18. This solution would be compatible with the upcoming EU Digital Identity Wallet, which will be coming at the end of 2026. And it will be developed in cooperation with, it is being developed in cooperation with member states, notably with a group of front runners that will test it out first. The technical specifications of the solution are ready, and the Commission is working with the provider for the white label app to be available by also by the summer break, so mid-2025, for localization and publishing in the member state. So this solution will allow the verification of age online without sharing any other information about the person whose age needs to be verified. And the aim is indeed, again, a bit like the guidelines, to avoid a patchwork of different solutions and national rules relying on different technology. So also reducing the burden for platforms that would have to deal with so many national approaches. And finally, two of the actions that were outlined in the political priorities for this Commission, the Action Plan Against Cyberbullying and the EU-wide inquiry. So the Action Plan Against Cyberbullying was launched amidst growing, well, what we've been talking until now, growing digitalization of young people's social interaction and lives, and increasing access to social media, which was also accompanied by an escalation in cyberbullying. About 1 in 6 adolescents report being victim of cyberbullying, and 1 in 8 is a perpetrator of cyberbullying or has been. Over the last 5 years, cyberbullying has been consistently one of the biggest issues for young people consulting the Safer Internet Center helplines. So whereas the exact scope of the action plan is still under consideration and work is ongoing to define it better, it will indicatively at least aim at developing a shared common understanding and definition of what cyberbullying is, to have a clear and common understanding of the issue that we're dealing with, mapping best practices implemented in member states and how they may be rolled out in all of the EU. For instance, there is the example of specific tools in some member states like France, of specific apps on this. And finally, also will aim at encouraging cooperation with the industry and civil society on this specific issue, to ensure that the work is again synced and coordinated across the EU. The overall goal is, again, that of encouraging a culture of seeking advice and of reporting cyberbullying. So the plan should also include easier ways to rely on Safer Internet Centers to do this, because we see that one of the main problems is that many cases still go undetected, unreported, and so it's a matter also of creating this culture of seeking advice, of reaching out for help, that children obviously are are not fully, don't have the tools to embrace. And so it will also be accompanied with grassroots work in schools through the contact points in member states, as well as trying to provide peer-to-peer support to children through children. And as a last point, the EU-wide inquiry into the impact of social media on health and well-being which is among the political priorities of the European Commission that President von der Leyen have outlined. The Commission is currently working to establish the format of experts that will conduct the inquiry, which will be an evidence-based exercise, and we look at the impact, as we see, of social media on both physical and mental well-being, with a focus again on minors, and it will aim at complementing existing research, which, as we saw, is numerous and diverse in this space, and also aim at ensure an evidence-based policy developments, as well as inform, of course, the enforcement of the DSA on these matters, which, as we try to explain, has already started. Yeah. Thank you. I'm mindful of time. I think that wasn't too long, so thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was great. It's actually, it looks like we are doing something, so that's very encouraging. Thank you very much for all these updates and recapping the initiatives that we have and the approach of the EU and member states. Of course, we only have 10 minutes left, and we want to make sure we have enough time for our closing remarks by the attaché of the permanent representation of Denmark. However, we have a couple of quick questions that, if you don't mind, if you can address, I can briefly direct them to you. So one of them is asking or suggesting this remark: when parents chat over coffee or do chores, they often hand to their crying kids their mobile devices without no built-in filter. If they watch adult content, children see it too without parents' attention. Shouldn't there be a quick switch to kids mode? So perhaps this is here suggesting that maybe we should enforce something like that, or maybe not. And the second question is about the Fediverse. That's the federated services, which are, as you probably know, a solution that is touted as a solution for people to connect and shape their spaces while making it easier to avoid hate speech, ads, intrusive algorithms. And someone wants to know if the Commission is doing anything in that area.
So thank you. So on the first question, I would not comment on the specific solutions or potential solutions that may be then covered in either the guidelines or in enforcement action. I would just say that, of course, safety will always be a matter of having both literacy of children and of parents as well. So it will be education, and it will have a design sort of element to it. So I cannot comment on that specific suggested solution, but of course there should be a balance of the two, or a combination of the two. For sure. And sorry, the second question was on...
it was about the Fediverse, the federated services, which are kind of an initiative that people take to shape their own spaces, and usually they're discussed as a potential solution because you avoid advertisements there, hate speech, but I'm not sure this is discussed at the Commission, right?
Again, I would not comment on one specific solution. I think, just as we say on other measures, such as, for example, age verification, there probably isn't a silver bullet of one action or solution to address this. There is, as I think I tried to give an overview of, a combination of soft, harder measures, policies, legislation, enforcement, as well as education literacy. I think it's a matter of finding really a balance and a good comprehensive and holistic approach to ensure the outcome on which I think everybody agrees, which is safer online environment for children.
Well said, dear colleague. Thank you very much again for your intervention and joining us today. Many thanks again. And now, last but not least, we are very lucky to have here the perspective of Denmark with the contribution of Mads Fiso Madsen, who is media and tech attaché at the permanent representation of Denmark to the EU. As I mentioned, Denmark is taking over the presidency in July, so we're looking forward to hearing his reactions and your comments, Madsen, from the council side of things, Denmark's own national initiatives and the priorities of your forthcoming presidency. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Eileen, and what a great morning session to be able to participate in. And I think we've heard some really great presentations, and I'm really happy to hear also the emphasis on especially the protection of minors in relation to digital health. But also, I think across presentations, a lot of focus on commercial practices, on EU-wide evidence gathering, and time spent online. So I think these topics are also hugely important to us. And they will be among one of the two main priorities of my Minister for Digital Affairs during our incoming Council presidency. So I think just to start from our own perspective, this has also been huge topics at the national level. And just last month, we had the finishing of our National Independent Expert Commission on Wellbeing of Children and Young People, which have just recently published a set of recommendations. These, of course, have to be assessed by our government, but they do include, among other recommendations, for instance, banning smartphones in elementary schools and postponing smartphone debut age until the age of 13. Ban on addictive designs and retention and certain retention mechanisms, as we've also discussed today. And finally, effective, which the final thing I'll highlight just now, effective age verification for all digital services. So the reason I'm mentioning these recommendations is also that I think they build a bridge to the EU agenda, and what we've also heard highlighted many times today, and I think is very timely. So first of all, we are very happy to hear the great emphasis and focus in, for instance, the Commission guidelines and mission letters on this upcoming EU-wide inquiry on the broader impact of social media and well-being. We think it's really, really timely to have this evidence-based focus and discussion, and to also use that to facilitate our discussion of the right tools. And we think also that we have to give credit in this regard, as I think also Dr. Lasry mentioned, to our Polish colleagues who have also started this discussion within the Council of Health Ministers. We're also super curious to follow and to help develop the action plan against cyberbullying. And finally, I think there's one important incoming file that we haven't talked much about today that we'll also be very, very eager to facilitate discussion on. That is, of course, the upcoming Digital Fairness Act that has, as we understand it, among its ambitions to also address addictive designs. And of course, we can speak a lot about the upcoming tools, and we, of course, as we also just heard, have some very important recently developed tools as well. And we fully appreciate that making sure that children are safe in the online world is one of the key objectives of the Digital Services Act. And we definitely look forward to seeing concrete results. And I think in this regard, as you also mentioned, it's specifically something that we're looking forward to in regards to these guidelines on Article 28. Finally, we also, as you just mentioned, are really, really looking forward to have to see like concrete developments and progress in regards to technical solutions to age verification that we think are an important tool for the future. We think that member states have a huge role to play here, but we of course fully realize that we need to play together and be closely coordinated with the mentioned efforts by the Commission. And I think by addressing all these themes within Council, we hope to be able to warm up to and provide valuable political guidelines and discussions for the upcoming Digital Fairness Act. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mads. That was very interesting to see what's cooking in Denmark, and we're looking forward to a very dynamic presidency yet again. It was very useful also for us to place further emphasis on the momentum that really exists around digital and mental health, including with the initiatives of your presidency. So that's all we have time for today, but that was a very rich conversation, a very rich Connect University. Yet again, thank you very much to all of you, dear guest speakers, for joining today, for making it a very enriching discussion and placing the issues further to the fore. And I would like to thank also our audience who's been very engaged today. So we're looking forward to seeing you again on the next Digital Connect University, which will certainly be held before the summer break. More to come. Please stay tuned on our Futurium website and on our YouTube channel. As reminded earlier, the recording and the slides will be made available to you. So thank you very much all, and we'll see you again very soon. Have a great day.